Hello and welcome. I'm Lucy Jackson. I'm a journalist with The National, and today I'm going to be joined by Yvonne Ridley, one of the 4 activists from Scotland who took part in the Global Summit Flotilla. It was the largest humanitarian mission of its kind, with nearly 500 activists from 44 different countries taking part, sailing to Gaza with the aim of delivering much-needed humanitarian aid. They were prevented from doing so by Israel, which intercepted the fleet and detained the activists, imprisoning them and then eventually deporting them. Activists have reported horrific conditions in prison, including a lack of access to food, water, and medication, as well as being subject to violent treatment and sleep deprivation. Concerns were raised in particular around Yvonne's own well-being. We've already spoken with another Scottish flotilla activist, Sid Khan, about his experience, which you can watch now. We're really glad to be joined by Yvonne today. Here's what she had to say.
And I just looked at him and he said, is this expensive? I said, no, but it has sentimental value. And he said, yes. And then he scrunched it up in the bin. I was arrested by the Taliban and held for 11 days. I would happily spend 2 months with the Taliban rather than 2 hours with the Israelis. No, I don't think I'm a hero. I just feel as though I've let people down.
So welcome, Yvonne. Thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, first of all, how are you feeling?
Yes, I feel good, although I still think that I'm on adrenaline at the moment more than anything else.
And obviously you were on the Umar al-Mokhtar boat, which was not part of the Global Summit Flotilla, but you ended up sailing alongside it. Now, how was that experience with everyone that you had on board? I mean, you had such an eclectic mix of people.
Well, there were 17 of us, including the captain. 3 were women, and we were Egyptian and Glasgow and myself. And I shared a cabin with the Canadian girl. She was also Egyptian. And Margaret was on the bottom bunk, and I was also on the bottom bunk. And she was just such great fun. Real pocket rocket is how I would describe her.
I mean, it must have made such a difference to have just a sort of familiar voice and sort of person with you to sort of experience that with. I mean, she's an incredible person from speaking to her. I mean, she's done so much, and everything that she did endure, and still, despite everything, she was just back on her feet straight away. I mean, she was at the Palestine stall on Saturday, just days after being released from hospital for treatment that she'd endured during her time in prison.
Well, she should have been one of the speakers, but she just refused to leave her station at the Palestine stall. And it was that very dedication which earned her a place on the Al-Mokhtar boat, because she's been doing that every Saturday for 25 years.
And why did you sign up to be part of the boat?
Well, I'd been on the very first boat which broke the siege in Gaza in 2008, and, nearly 20 years ago now, but because of what was happening in Gaza, because of the genocide, because of the starvation policy that Israel had, I felt so helpless. I wanted to march, to petition, to do anything that I could to try and make it stop. And I do very much believe in people power. And when the people start moving, that's when I think great things can happen. I mean, I've lived through the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Ceausescu regime in Romania and other Eastern Bloc countries. And all of these collapses, including the Soviet Union, came about because of people power. So I was wanting to do something more, and I didn't know what. And then I got a phone call, funnily enough, from one of the people that I joined the Viva Palestina road convoys to break the siege. And he said, we're doing this boat. And I said, count me in. And we've known each other for nearly 20 years, so he knows me. And because when you set out on a journey, you think you know people, and then you get a few miles into that journey and you suddenly realize, gosh, we don't have anything in common, or I don't really like this person, or, oh, I wished I'd joined another group. And so we'd already traveled together. And that's when you really find out about people.
Absolutely. I mean, let's sort of move on to what actually sort of happened on the night of the interception, because for a lot of us sort of watching from Scotland and from abroad, there came a point when all communication was just obviously cut off and we just had no idea what was happening. Now you were traveling quite far at the back of the fleet, which means that you were one of the last boats, presumably to be intercepted. I mean, what was going through your head at that time when you were aware that other boats were being intercepted?
Well, it's like a fire drill. You can prepare for it, and when the whistle goes or the alarm goes off, you get into your stride, or what you've trained to do. But it all goes out of the window, and it was like, oh my God, we're going to be boarded. Now, they had boarded a couple of boats. I think Sid's was one of the boats that they boarded. And we were getting this feedback because they were live streaming. And so we just had to sit there and wait to be boarded. But as it turned out, the truth is, I don't think the Israelis had a strategy, and they came with these inflatable boats with gun positions fixed, and they just sort of circled us a few times and shone a really bright light to see where we all were. We'd all agreed that in the event of this happening, we would all assemble life jackets and ready and waiting, which is what we did. So they could see all of us quite clearly, and they could see that we weren't armed. And just to prove the point, we held our hands up so they could see. We weren't surrendering, but we wanted them to see, we're not armed.
To give them the least possible chance of showing violence towards you, I suppose.
Yeah.
At that point.
But it was still scary because, we've seen what the Israelis have done to paramedics. We've seen what they've done to journalists. We've seen what they've done to doctors. And, that's all that did prey on our minds. So we were quite relieved when they didn't board, but they spoke to the captain and said, you've got two choices. You either turn back and go back to Libya, save your boat, save the aid, and just go. Or if you don't clear off by the morning, we will board and seize the boat.
I mean, how close did you get to Gaza in the end?
Well, we were probably about 12 hours at that point from sailing into Gaza. And I think that after they'd gone, we discussed, what do we do? We've got two choices. And I said, actually, we've got three choices. And it's like, what's the third choice? And I said, we can make a run for it and try and get into Gaza. Of course, everybody else thought the same way, which is why so many of us ended up in prison. But, we were in international waters. Israel had absolutely no jurisdiction in international waters. And we also supposedly had the Spanish Navy and the Italian Navy. But I didn't actually see much
I think
of them.
As they sort of, you got to what they call the danger zone, so where previous missions have been intercepted, they one by one sort of turned around and left and kind of left you all to your own accord. I mean, how does that feel? You supposedly have their support and then at the last minute they turn away.
we did feel abandoned, and because we weren't part of the Sunod flotilla as such, we very much felt, like the Billy No mates of the Mediterranean, sort of sitting there. But we just we went for it, and we were really united. There was only 17 of us. We were all on first name terms, and we were all watching each other's backs, and there was great camaraderie.
Fabulous. In terms of obviously getting to Ashdod port, you were processed there and then you were then taken on to Kutsia prison, which we'll get onto in a minute, but I'm just keen to hear a little bit more about what actually happened when you arrived at the port and the process of sort of being, stamped and your picture taken and all of that. Like, what kind of treatment did you receive when you got there?
Well, first we were boarded,
Yeah.
and the IDF, they put the men in the cargo hold where all the aid was, and the 3 women, we were put back in our cabin and the door left open, and they came round with water and sandwiches, and we told them, give them to the people of Gaza, you're starving them, and all our insults just bounced off them, and they were unbearably nice, which is very difficult when you're trying to call someone a baby killer and they are responding. So after we sailed into Ashdod, which I have to say was, for a supposedly major seaport, it was very quiet. And I think that had a lot to do with the Italian dock workers' strike. This was not a busy port at all. It looked as though it was...
Explain a little bit about why Italian dock workers were on strike.
Oh, well, this whole global outrage, I think, started with the flotilla when the Italian dock workers showed their support and said, if any interception or hands are placed on the flotilla, we will close down Europe. We will contact our comrades across the European ports. And they did. And it really showed the power of solidarity when workers come together. And it's Scotland already did this. There was that film No Passaran, in which some Scots trade unionists refused to let aircraft go off to a junta in South America, and they had this unpassable picket line and stopped these fighter jets, I think, from going. And it was that sort of solidarity. And it's obviously working because, as I say, Ashdod port looked as though it was closed for business when we arrived there. They put us alongside the Alma, which was the boat that Sid, the other Scot, there were 2 Scots, I think, had been in. And we were moved from our boat, the Al Mokhtar, onto the Alma, and then we sat on the deck and waited and caught up with a few familiar faces. I'll name drop here. I'm quite shameless about this. I saw Nelson Mandela's grandson.
Wow.
And I shouted over, "Hello, Chief."
That's quite the name drop.
and he came over and chatted for a while. And as I say, we caught up with a few familiar faces, and I think everybody was relaxed because the Israelis seemed to be treating us at that point with kid gloves. And then we were moved forward, and our group was the next group to step onto Ashdod port. And as we stepped onto the port, this woman, she was quite small, and she shouted at me, "Remove that," pointing at my kafaya hijab. And I said, "This is part of me. I'm a Muslim, and this is, part of my faith. I can't remove it." And she said, "Take it off now." And she's really aggressive and shouting. And I said, "If you don't like it, you take it off, and everybody around here will be a witness to what you are doing to me." And she continued shouting, and then I just felt this huge slap on the back of my head, and it was a soldier, and he twisted my arm at my back, and had his hand on my head, and basically frog marched me towards this vast hall where everyone was being processed. And during that journey, he pulled off my hijab and threw it on the ground. So I complained loudly. I honestly can't remember what I said, but it probably wouldn't pass muster on the deadline. I can't remember what it's called now, but anyway. So instead of taking me straight into the hall, he took me into this covered area, and it was like a big schoolyard, and I walked in, and there were about 100 people sitting cross-legged, looking quite subdued, and I was told to sit in this yard. So I sat, and I'm looking round for any familiar faces, but I couldn't see anybody. And I guess these were people who had resisted in some way or form the occupation forces. So I was sitting there for about 10 minutes, and then they called out my name. And so I got up and went over, and then they took me into this vast hall. It was like a massive sports stadium, and there were makeshift desks set up, and we were put round this. It was like a call centre. This is the best way of describing it. And there was just loads of chaos, lots of flotilla people, but 3-4 times as many occupation forces, from military to civilian military, police, and all sorts in there. And as I was walking towards the first point of the process, a woman came up to me and she said, "Take that off." And I'm looking, and it was my skirt. I'd worn trousers all the way through the journey, but because I knew that we were going to be probably filmed, and I put on a tartan skirt which went to the floor and wrapped over a Palestinian tartan scarf. And she just said, "Take that off." And I said, "I'm not wearing anything underneath." Not in true Scottish tradition. I did have a small pair of panties on as well. But I just said, "I'm not wearing anything underneath." She said, "Take it off." And again, I protested, and she just shouted louder. And then 2 of the men moved forward, and just the thought of them touching me to remove my skirt, and I just thought, oh. So I just slipped my skirt off and kicked it over to her, and I said, "There, are you satisfied now?" And another Israeli shouted over to her, I don't understand Hebrew, but I guess he was saying, "This is too much, tell her to cover up." And And so she shouted back at me and ordered me to put my skirt on. And then she took me into a private changing area and into a cubicle and said, take it off. And I said, do you fancy me or something? I said, you keep wanting me to strip off in front of you. I said, is it something? And she just shouted again to take off the skirt. And it was basically all about humiliating me.
Yeah.
That's all she wanted to do. And this really didn't sit easy with me because I just realized, Israeli women like us to believe that they're feminists and fighting for women's rights, but they're not. They are the front line of the patriarchy. And there she was in this very misogynistic atmosphere, telling me to strip off in front of her fellow soldiers. And it, as I say, that really, how women could treat other women like that. No sisterhood at all. And then eventually we then went to the first part of this process where they wanted to search our bags. He got my purse out, opened my purse, and pulled out, it looked like a lot of cash, but it was small denominations for tips and things like that in euros and dollars and pounds. And he just pulled it all out and was just throwing it all around. And then he pulled out my press cards, and I had 2 or 3 press cards. And he's saying, what are these? I said, they're my cards that tell you I'm a journalist. And he went, in the bin. And everything was going in the bin. Then they told me, take off your jewellery. And my hands were in plastic hand ties at this time. And I'm saying, it's difficult. And they said, if you don't take it off, we will. So I thought, oh, gosh. So I somehow managed to get my first bracelet off and put it down. And people say, why on earth would you wear jewellery, on a flotilla? But you get a gift. It was, the bracelets were from my husband, and I'd never take them off. So I had to take my bracelets off. I had to take my watch off. And one bracelet wouldn't come off, and it was a little diamond bracelet that my husband had bought me for an anniversary. And this man just yanked it off and in the bin. And I said, that bracelet's expensive. So then they got out my photographs. And of course, we've all got pictures of our mum and dad and family, in purses. And there was a little photograph of my daughter lying on a Palestinian scarf. And he said, what is this? And I said, that's my daughter. And that's the only photograph I have of her as a newborn baby. And he said, what's this filth that she's lying on? Referring to the kafaya. And I just looked at him and he said, is this expensive? I said, no, but it has sentimental value. And he said, yes. And then he scrunched it up in the bin. She pulled out a T-shirt, and I had deliberately turned it inside out. And she noticed it was inside out, so she turned it round and she held it up and she sort of looked at me. And it was a picture of Layla Khalid, the Palestinian hijacker from the 70s, who is an iconic figure still today in Palestine. If you go to the occupied West Bank, her image is on the walls. This same iconic image of her in a kafaya with her Kalashnikov. And it had a woman's place is in the resistance. And so she held this up, not at all impressed. And this soldier just lunged forward with a knife and he started slashing it. It was just and didn't stop until the whole picture of Layla was in shreds. And I said, after all these years, and she still scares you.
I mean, that's exactly sounds like what the reaction was, is that they're terrified of, any kind of resistance. And
It was, he was in such a frenzy. I think he actually lost it for a second, just and he was, almost shaking. And I just thought, I must ring Layla when I get back home and tell her about this, because she has been ill and she had a massive brain hemorrhage, but she's recovering slowly. And it will make her laugh to know that even today in 2025, the woman who was headline news in the 1970s is still triggering Zionists. And so I haven't made that phone call yet, but I know that she will be cheered up by it. So this was just me, and, everybody got the same treatment. Yes. There was a girl from Australia who had a beautiful abalone shell a friend from New Zealand had given her. And, it's just close friends saying, here, take this, travel with it, it'll keep you safe, or think of me. Or so it was, what's in this box? And she said, it's a shell. And the soldier opened it and she picked it up in her hand and she said, this is so beautiful. And she said, yes, it's a gift from a friend. And she showed it to one of the men soldiers, and he looked at it and said, oh, wow, I've never seen such colours before. And then he slung it in the bin. And the more you wanted something or needed something, medication, all my pills went in the bin. And then there was a prescription, and he picked up the prescription and said, what's this? And I said, well, that is a list of all the pills that I take, and I'll need that to give to the prison doctor, because he'll have to replace what you've just thrown in the bin. And he just looked at me and again scrunched it up in his hand and threw it in the bin, as if to say, yeah, what are you going to do about it? And I heard various people shrieking or gasping at this, and these were people who had diabetes, who needed their insulin. My medication I could have gone without for about a week before it would really kick in and take effect. But somebody who needs insulin, somebody who is on heart pills, these were life-saving medicines, and they were just throwing them in the bin.
And of course, when you got to jail, to Kitsia, which I feel like we should say, it's not just a normal jail, it's a jail that Israel uses to house who it deems to be Palestinian terrorists. There have been thousands of people detained there, and it's notorious for human rights abuses. Lots of reports have come out about it. We obviously got very limited reports about all of the participants' well-being at that point. And the one thing that we did hear about you quite early on is that your jewelry and stuff had been taken, but that your medication had been confiscated, and that you had a limited access to sort of food and water and stuff as well. Can you just, are you comfortable enough talking a little bit about what that kind of experience was like in those days where you were in prison?
The prison was called Kitsiot, which is about 30 kilometers from Beersheba. There was about 500 flotilla people. I think a couple of thousand Palestinians who we never saw were in that facility. We were, the cell I was held in, cell number 9. I don't know if we were the bad guys or not, but after 4 days we noticed that we were the only ones that were never let out for for exercise. So we decided maybe we should just cool our singing.
Were you sort of protesting while you were in the cell?
Night and day. Bella Ciao was one of our favourites. I was locked up with South American, Mexican, and an Australian. And, these girls, they had so many songs. And it was one way for us just to sound off and release some tension. And of course, anybody just needs to look up the record of Kitziot prison, which thankfully I didn't do until I was released. And these prison officers have a history of looting, pilfering, sexual abuse, violence, aggression. I really could not trust these people at all. They were drained of humanity. And
at this point as well, I mean, you hadn't had any sort of contact really with the outside world at all. And I mean, had you been visited by anyone from the embassy at that point?
Well, I wasn't able to see a lawyer despite repeated requests. I wasn't able to see a doctor despite repeated requests. And one day, I think it was the fourth day, I was hauled out of bed about 10 o'clock at night and taken to a court. And I was taken into this court, and the judge was there, and it was basically like a porter cabin, although he insisted it was a proper court. And he said, why did you come here? I said, I came on a flotilla. I was kidnapped and held hostage. And he said, you weren't hostage. And I said, I am here before you against my will. I was brought into this country, and I said, and now you want me to sign a document saying that I've illegally entered.
Yeah.
And as I said, I am not signing anything of the sort.
I feel like that's important to clarify is, when you were being processed, the crime that you were essentially being tried in front of a judge for was for illegally entering Israel, which is just completely untrue. I mean, you weren't trying to enter Israel at all. Your goal was Gaza.
No, I mean, during the process, in fact, just before I got to be told, sign this, Ben Gavir appeared, strutting, swaggering around, smiling, saying, you're all going to prison for a very long time. And I gave a double take, and I thought, oh my God, that man. And I just went running towards him and shouted, from the river to the sea. And before I could finish off, 5 men had jumped on me and grabbed me by my throat, my mouth. One pecked my nose, just anything to shut me up. I don't know if they would get into trouble because of this or what. But after that, I was put in metal handcuffs and my hands put behind my back. And the only advantage was that I was fast-tracked through that process.
Yeah.
But yes, the judge just said, you know what? I said, all I want to do is give baby milk to babies. I said, is that a crime in your eyes? And he said, do you want to go to Gaza? And I said, oh, yes, please. If you can send me to Gaza, I will be able to complete my mission, which is to pick up the aid and deliver it to the people of Gaza. And he just screamed at me, get out.
And that was it.
And that was Israeli justice.
Right.
Not interested that I had no doctor, no lawyer, no, just, and they call themselves a democracy. I mean, most people who know me know that over 20 years ago, it was actually the anniversary while I was incarcerated, I was arrested by the Taliban
Yeah.
and held for 11 days. I would happily spend 2 months with the Taliban rather than 2 hours with the Israelis. It was, I think it's been more traumatizing. I'm so angry at the injustice. So God knows how the Palestinian prisoners who've been released this week, how they're feeling, because what I went through was just a tiny bit of what they endured. And it does give you a sense of injustice, and it does make you feel angry. And, I'm still very much angry by what happened to me.
I mean, I remember you mentioning that in terms of your previous experience in terms of being in jail in Afghanistan. I mean, how did those experiences really compare?
The prisons were pretty much like for like. A very thin mattress on a hard floor, which I actually was able to enjoy because I do like a solid surface to lie on. But I would say that, I was on hunger strike on both occasions. But I do know that in the Afghan prison, if you've got the money, you can buy food in and cook your own food, which certainly wasn't available in Israel. And the quality of the food, it looked, there were ants all over, running all over the food. And there was no taunting. No, the Afghan, they had a couple of women prison officers, and they were kind. And unlike the women in this prison, we called the women the chihuahuas because they were, just snapping all the time. And, I keep saying this, no sisterhood at all. Some of our cellmates had their monthlies, and we had to scream and shout to get pads. And, any woman in the world meeting another woman would instantly help out in that situation, but not the Israeli women. They were something else. And as I say, they were used as the front of the patriarchy.
I mean, let's sort of move on a little bit towards your release. I mean, we initially heard that you were going to potentially be released, and then you weren't released until a day later. And there was quite a lot of concern back home over your well-being and, what had actually happened that meant you weren't released that day. I mean, can you talk us through a little bit of what actually happened there?
Yes, well, there was a rumour circulating that I'd gone missing, and I think that happened because I was supposed to be released the same day as Margaret. And in fact, I saw her on Saturday, and she told me I wasn't going to go until I'd seen you, and they said she's already on the bus. Of course, the bus wasn't a normal passenger bus. This is Israel. The bus, you were locked in a cubicle of 2 seats, so you couldn't see anything. Mm-hmm. And so she, they said to her, she's already on board. And I think they genuinely thought that I was already on board. But what had happened, they came to the cell and opened this hatch and shouted, Yvonne Ridley. And I said, yes. And they said, you're going home. Yalla, yalla, meaning quick, quick. And my husband couldn't believe that I told everybody how old I was, because I'm usually but I told the crowd on the Saturday, I am an old woman. I'm 67. And I couldn't just spring up as I would have done 20 years ago and leapt for the door. I had to get up and, with this false hip and my knees were buggered. And so it wasn't an easy process. And I got up and he kept screaming, "Yalla, yalla," at me. And then the last time he went, "Yalla, yalla, you're going home." And I just exploded at him and said, "I wish you were bloody well going home." I may have actually used something more stronger than that, but and he was about as happy as me, and he just slammed the door shut, and that was the end of that.
Have an extra day.
So I didn't get home, and of course Margaret's then waiting for everybody to get off the buses and sees that I'm not there, and she's saying, she's gone missing. So that's how that story, I think, got out.
And obviously you are back home now, but you're not back home necessarily thanks to the UK government. I mean, you were deported to Jordan. Was it Jordan? And then you flew to Istanbul. And then from there, what happened and why wasn't the UK involved in that?
Well, in Jordan, all our consular representatives were in the airport. And I'm looking round, and some are proudly waving their flags, so they're easy to spot. I couldn't see the butcher's apron, the Union Jack. So I'm looking round, and that's when I first bumped into Sid.
Right.
Properly, and we were able to greet each other. And he said he would call me if he could find the consular officials. And I'm looking round, and I saw my crewmates from the boat, the Al Mokhtar boat. They were with their Libyan ambassador, and they introduced me to the Libyan ambassador. And then I went back and saw Sid talking to the consular officials. And they said to me, "Right, we'll get you to Amman in a hotel, and then the next day we'll get you onto a flight, but we need to pull you all together in Amman first, just to iron out a few." And I'm saying, iron out what? I said, the Israelis are paying for this flight, aren't they? Which is what they were supposed to do. And they said, well, it's not as straightforward as that. And I just thought, I knew that Israel was concerned after they had taken over 500 people. They knew they had to get those people back home. And I think someone got the calculator out and worked out how much it was going to cost for kidnapping us. So that's why the Malaysians and the Turks were first out, because Malaysia and Turkey both said, we'll pay, we'll cover the air flights for our people.
Whereas, of course, the UK government said that it wasn't going to be paying.
The Westminster government just, no, they weren't. Not only were they incapable of standing up to Israel and defending us, they were basically saying, it's your fault, you're going to have to pay. And Sid argued with them. I said that I wasn't happy as well. And then I went back and told my friends in Libya what was happening. And the ambassador just stepped forward. He said, you must come with us. We will take care of you. And, we can't thank you enough for what you've done for Palestine. And it would be an honour to host you.
That's such a stark difference.
I just thought, my goodness. So I went back and I said to one of the women, please don't take this personally, but I'm not going to go home with you. I'm going to go home with the Libyans. And she went, well, how are you going to get there? And where, And I said, they are flying us over to Istanbul. tonight and putting us in a hotel. And tomorrow, the government is sending a private jet, and they're going to fly us back to Tripoli,
Keir Starmer would never do that, would he?
where there's going to be some sort of civic
Yeah.
reception. And she looked and she went, oh. And I said, so obviously I'm going to go with the people who really want me. And she looked a bit crestfallen, but she, she was a very nice person. They're only as good as the information that they're given or allowed to, and they have to represent this wretched government, which looks upon people like me, Margaret and Sid as something beneath their feet. So I told Sid, and he said, gosh, I wish I was coming to Tripoli with you. And then I mentioned this to the ambassador, and he said, well, go and get him. He said, we are so grateful for everything you've done. So I went back, but I couldn't find Sid after that. So,
let's talk a little bit about that kind of reception that you did get, because I remember we were speaking about it and you mentioned getting some kind of award from the Libyan government.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, when we arrived in Tripoli, there was a sort of military and a guard of honor and a band playing and
Wow.
crowds and crowds of people. And we came down the steps, and one of the boat crew, he just kissed the ground as soon as he got, he just so much love for his country. And we were treated like heroes. And I just thought, if I'd flown into Heathrow, SO15 would probably have said, right, come this way, and terror charges, or which is what they did with Sarah Wilkinson. Shocking, but anyway, so we were treated so well. And then I think it was later that day, we were taken to their parliament and met their prime minister. And he gave each one of us, I think it's called the Libyan Humanitarian Award, but it's the highest award that you can get in the country. It's a bit like the VC, although that's just for military. But I was given this award, and I just thought, wow. It was just so moving. And as I was introduced to the Prime Minister, he said, if you want to stay, you can stay for as long as you want. You're our guest. And not what I would have got from Keir Starmer. In fact, Keir Starmer wouldn't have I don't think Keir Starmer's met any of the flotilla people at all to say thank you for helping or wanting to go and help feed starving babies.
The whole time you've been away, we've obviously been in constant touch with the UK government and getting updates, and media asking the Prime Minister for his thoughts on, what Israel had done, and pretty much radio silence. It was either no comment, nothing on the record, or, it's up to the Israeli government. It's their concern. That's kind of the response that we were getting.
Well, it was really humbling. And then from there, we went to the Palestinian embassy the next day, and there were more accolades, more awards. But, you would expect that from the Palestinian embassy. And one of the female consular officials there, she came and gave me a really big hug. And she said, where did you get your strength from? I said, oh, for goodness sake, I'm nothing compared to the Palestinian women. That's where I draw my inspiration from you, people like you. So it was wonderful to get all of these accolades, but at the same time, you know, the people in Gaza were still suffering, and they're still suffering now despite this so-called ceasefire. And I don't feel worthy of all of this attention, but I've got my husband, he's Algerian, and to his annoyance, I've got the Libyan flag flying above the bed at the moment, and I said, that's my flag. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking a lot about obviously people calling you heroes and, getting all these awards and, you don't feel like you sort of are worthy of those accolades. I mean, obviously there was a pro-Palestine protest that took place in Glasgow over the weekend. And I think it was just days after you'd landed back in the UK. I think you first arrived at Manchester Airport. But we obviously heard from you, and we heard from a couple of the other flotilla participants from Scotland as well. And we also heard from the Palestinian ambassador, Hussam Zomlot, and he praised you all as heroes. And I spoke to him after, and he said that he really, really admired the sort of the bravery and the strength that you'd all shown, especially when governments had basically doing what governments had failed to do. Do you agree with that sort of characterization of yourself as heroes in that sense? I mean, you talked a bit about what Palestinians go through every day. I mean, the focus surely obviously needs to be on Palestine.
I just look back and I keep thinking of this little Palestinian girl who was about 8 or 9, and she is on a little YouTube video, and she's saying that she's at Gaza port and she's looking out for our sails from the flotilla, and she wants to see the flotilla come in, and then, typical child, she said, well, I'd like a bar of chocolate. And it crushes me to think that we didn't deliver the aid. Some of the medicines that we had on board were like little sachets, like sauce packets, for burger buns, little sachets. And when you open them, they're jammed full of easily digestible, super high protein, tasty goodness that could save a child who's on the brink. And I just wanted to deliver those sachets. There were 6,000 of them, and potentially life-saving. I was going to say the miracle of food. When did food become a miracle? It's 2025, and starvation isn't an easy thing to reverse. It will take weeks, if not months, for those children to regain their weight, to get back to a standing start, and then start to develop all over again. And it really makes me sad. So no, I don't think I'm a hero. I just feel as though I've let people down.
I also feel like you have inspired a lot of people, though, in what you've done. And a lot of people that I've spoken to have been sort of like, more flotillas will sail. This isn't the last time that this will happen. So I suppose going forward from here, what needs to be done?
Everything. It's like taking a child into a sweet shop and saying, what do you want? Everything needs to be done. Gaza needs to be rebuilt. The Palestinian people need to be consulted. Forget the two-state solution. It is not going to work. Anybody who talks about a two-state solution today is in La La Land. You know, the Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived together quite peacefully for centuries, and they can go back and do that again. And yes, a lot of really evil things have happened to the Palestinians since October 7. And there's a degree of sympathy with the Israelis over October 7. But they have to learn to trust one another again, and learn to forgive and forget. And people might say, oh, that's impossible. But, you know, they did it in South Africa. And I think that's why countries like South Africa need to be involved in this process of peace and reconciliation. Britain can't do it. You know, Britain sold bombs that killed babies, and America can't do it. You know, everything that Trump is looking at is through the lens of a hard-nosed businessman. The Palestinians need to be consulted. And in the meantime, we ordinary folk need to continue rising, resisting, marching, and not give up until we can all sit back and Palestine really is free. And, you know, Nelson Mandela, as his grandson reminded me, said that the freedom of the Palestinians is really tied in to South Africa. I would say it's also tied into Scotland. You know, we must learn from this and see what people power can achieve. And the Scottish cause for independence needs to become a global cause. And sorry, I'm a bit sniffy now, but I think that that we in Scotland need to take inspiration from the Palestinians. God forbid we ever are occupied in the way they are, but the clock is ticking on freedom and liberty and independence, and we need to move now.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you.